Hi, this is TapCat, and 2K has released a pair of trailers today announcing XCOM Chimera Squad, a new game for the PC scheduled for an April 24th release. There's a lot of interesting information in there, but there are 5 main changes from the previous games that I want to talk to you about today. So if you'll give me the next 8 minutes, I'll give you the lowdown on just how different an XCOM game Chimera Squad may turn out to be. For those who may not have seen the trailers, here's a 45-second recap of the basic concept of the game. Chimera Squad is set 5 years after the events of XCOM 2, when Earth has been liberated and a large number of aliens are still here. Humans and aliens are trying to live together peacefully, but there are some troublemakers out there, and that's where Chimera Squad comes in. We'll be assigned to keep the peace in an area known as City 31. Using an approach reminiscent of XCOM Enemy Unknown's panic levels, the city and its various neighborhoods will have gauges measuring their level of unrest. If the unrest for one neighborhood maxes out, it increases unrest for the whole city. And if the city as a whole hits a critical level, then the game is lost, and humanity and the aliens fall into a spiral of violence. The first change is also the most obvious, so let's get it out of the way right now. If Chimera Squad's job is to keep the peace between humans and aliens, then what better way to start than leading by example? Based on what we've seen so far, the squad looks like it will include 11 members that include humans, the pod people that were brewed up for Advent, a Viper, Sectoid, and a Muton. It's not clear whether there will be any other aliens added to that roster. In fact, it's not clear if we'll be able to recruit any new members at all beyond those 11, which would be another significant change. We'll revisit that aspect a little later in the video though, so for now, let's move on. One of the biggest changes on the tactical map is the addition of breach mode. The basic idea is that when we first enter an area to encounter aliens, we'll be given a choice of entry points, each with their own pros and cons. As we make those choices, we'll also decide the turn order for each member of our squad. Once the breach is made and you've started the encounter, there will be still more tactical choices, and we're told that they can have a significant impact on the remainder of the encounter. Now, we don't know if every encounter will start with a breach, but it does suggest that at least some of the time we'll have a much more structured beginning to combat and have fewer instances of triggering a new pod of enemies with your last move. All in all, it sounds like this new aspect of XCOM is one that could take some time to master, but will hopefully be worth the effort. Combat is still turn-based, but now the turns for each combatant interleave, and there's no longer a discrete turn for the player, followed by a turn for the enemy, and so on. Instead, each agent and alien will be assigned a spot in the turn order, and for the most part, that's going to be locked in. Now, you will have an option to move one agent's order to the beginning of the turn, but only one time for each mission, so use it wisely. At the moment, it's not clear how the turn order is decided for the enemy. Could be random, or there could be some kind of initiative stat, but we'll have to wait and see which is true. As far as we know, we will decide the turn order for our agents during breach mode, although it's always possible that something in the game could disrupt that. I'm not going to pretend that I've even begun to wrap my mind around all the implications of this, but I am pretty confident that it will take some serious adjustments to adapt to the new battlefield conditions. We can no longer count on using our whole squad to take out the most dangerous enemy before it can act, and it could be easier for us to get flanked when the aliens get to move before we have a chance to move a particularly vulnerable agent to a safer spot. Thankfully, the video does show some crowd control abilities along the lines of stuns and disabling weapons, and I have a feeling that these options may be critical to surviving in XCOM Chimera. One of the true pillars of the XCOM franchise has been the permanent death of our soldiers on the battlefield. Unless you choose to reload an earlier save, anyone who dies during a mission is gone for good, and the Iron Man mode took away even that escape hatch. But XCOM Chimera appears to break from that tradition in a fairly dramatic way. If an agent hits 0 health, he or she will begin to bleed out. If one of your other agents can get there in time to stabilize them, then they live and will be unconscious for the rest of the mission. Well, fair enough, we've seen that kind of thing before. But if you fail to get there and the soldier dies, then the mission immediately fails and you must restart it or reload an earlier save. Unless I am just grossly misinterpreting what we're seeing in the trailer, then the permanent loss of our soldiers, or agents as they're called in this game, is out and replaying missions is in. I mentioned earlier that it's possible we won't be recruiting new agents during the game the way we usually do. My initial reasoning behind that conclusion was based on the 11 agents listed on the XCOM website, and the fact that when a character would die, there's a screen that tells you that Chimera Squad can't endure the death of even a single agent. And that would be strange if we could readily groom replacements, and there's also no mention of doing something like that throughout the trailer. But my amateur detective skills were ultimately rendered moot when I found various news articles that all specified there will be 11 agents. So I'm sure they got that information from the developer, and we can safely remove this from the speculation category and call it confirmed. Before we move on, let's also consider another aspect of this, which is that we apparently won't be able to rename our squad members anymore, and probably won't be able to customize their appearance much, because these aren't randomly generated tunes that we can treat as paper dolls. They are now characters specifically created to look and act a certain way and fulfill their parts in a presumably pre-scripted story. Now, whether you'll ultimately consider that a plus or a minus, it's definitely going to be a switch from what we're used to. Before we wrap this up, I want to take a minute to pull back from the individual parts of XCOM Chimera Squad and talk about the game as a whole. Recent XCOM games have had a story, but they served more as a framework for the stories of our own soldiers to develop over the course of a long campaign. It was typically filled with moments of victory, failure, and yes, death. New heroes arose in each campaign, and so did new martyrs for the cause. But Chimera Squad looks to be a different breed of XCOM game. I suspected after watching the trailer that this might be a smaller, more story-driven campaign, and after seeing the retail price of $19.99 US with 50% off on pre-order, I'm pretty certain that's the case. This is being presented not as a sequel to XCOM 2, but as a standalone game set in the XCOM universe. So even though I do think it's useful to talk about the many ways they've changed things up compared to Enemy Unknown and XCOM 2, the real question is whether this game, as it is, holds enough appeal for you to justify spending $10 or $20 to give it a try. And that's something each of us will have to decide for ourselves. Alright, that covers the biggest news that I found, but let me know in the comments if there was something important you think I left out. And for that matter, if you think I misinterpreted anything in the trailers and got something wrong, well, let us know that too. If you found this video interesting, then please give it a like to help other people find it. Especially for a channel my size, it really does help. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, you might want to do that, as I will continue to cover XCOM Chimera through its release on April 24th and beyond. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope we see you next time.